Welcome to Champions of Data and AI, brought to you by Databricks. In each episode, we salute champions of data and AI, the change agents who are shaking up the status quo. These mavericks are rethinking how data and AI can enhance the human experience. We'll dive into their challenges and celebrate their successes, all while getting to know these leaders a little more personally.
Welcome, everyone. We're back with another thoughtful and informative episode of the Champions of Data and AI series. I'm Chris D'Agostino, your host for this episode. Driving any type of change across a large enterprise is hard enough. Imagine having to transform your organization to be data and AI driven to improve operational efficiency, accelerate innovation to gain new insights, and implement best practices to build data products. In this episode, John Irvin, Chief Data Officer of Information Technology Services at Deloitte, joins me to dive into this very transformation. John will also share the role data and AI are playing at Deloitte to help them become carbon neutral in the global fight against climate change. Let's get started. John, welcome. It's great to have you with us on the Champions of Data and AI.
Hi, Chris. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, great. Let's get started. So a couple of things. We're going to do sort of two set of questions here, just going through some things just for the audience to get to know you a little bit. And so one thing is we like to think like, what if the day got shortened? If there were only 23 hours in the day, what would you change about your daily routine?
There were only 23 hours in a day. My first reaction, Chris, is I would sleep 1 hour less. But to be quite honest with you, I'm learning, maybe it's as I get older, how important sleep is. So maybe I'd go to bed an hour. Maybe my answer is I go to bed an hour early.
Yeah, see, mine was the same answer. I would sleep an hour less and I would get up and do my fitness routine sooner rather than wait towards the end of the day. So speaking of fitness and things like that in terms of stress relieving, what one activity do you enjoy that helps you de-stress from what I'm sure is a pretty stressful job as the CDO of Deloitte?
De-stress. I do a lot to try to prevent stress. I get up early in the morning. I have my quiet time. I do meditation, prayer, and even kind of yoga. But when that doesn't work, I eat.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Those seem to be like two opposite ends of the spectrum.
They are, but here's the thing. In the last 6 months, I've lost 20 pounds. So
well, then you're either doing a lot of yoga or you're doing healthier eating.
No, I'm doing more proactive.
So John, what is it about data and AI that keeps you coming back to work each day?
The fact that I am constantly learning and constantly challenged. It's really, I think, Chris, even kind of the same, a lot of the same ways it's kept me even at Deloitte. I'm just learning. I'm surrounded by, amazing people, intelligent people, and I'm learning every day, and especially in this data and analytics space that we're in, whether it's what's the latest, greatest new capabilities I should be thinking about for my customers, what are regulations that are out there that I need to be worried about. It's just something new every day, and that kind of keeps me going.
Yeah, and it seems like, kind of again back to the fact that you've been there for so long and you've had roles within Deloitte that have been data focused. Yeah. At least my career, which is similar duration as yours, we're in a really interesting period of time where data and AI and all of just how organizations become more efficient with data is such a strong topic, even inside the boardroom, for example. But if you go back 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, that certainly wasn't the case, right? And so I'm curious about the culture of Deloitte versus also your own personal path within the organization. Like, did you find yourself sort of navigating, your own career to the data-centric projects because you sort of could see the future of just how important data was becoming to run a global organization?
I've listened to a number of the Champions of Data series. You interviewed a lady from Estee Lauder.
Yeah.
I think it was
Sol Rashidi.
Sol Rashidi, thank you. She said something that really stuck with me, Chris. It's kind of related to this. She said she was, if I get this right, uncomfortable with comfort, uncomfortable being comfortable.
Yeah, I think she said get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
Which is just this idea of don't stagnate, continue to evolve, continue to challenge yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and she was, well, the part that resonated with me is she kind of said, she's kind of like that. She doesn't like to get comfortable, and as soon as she's feeling comfortable, she's got to she'll push herself to get uncomfortable. It doesn't happen naturally. And that's what happened to me. I showed up at Deloitte after I got off the road as an independent consultant, showed up at Deloitte, running our SAP finance platform. And after a few years, I kind of found myself thinking, no offense to the SAP consultants out there, how many more ways can I figure out how to get journal entries and accounts payable, invoices into the system, or accounts payable, accounts receivable invoices out? And I was just kind of stagnated. I wasn't feeling challenged. There was a job that opened up on the data warehouse team, and I went and talked to him. I explored more. I said, look, I don't know anything about data warehousing. But I have a technology background. I'm a software developer. I've been an engagement product manager. And oh, by the way, I know all of Deloitte's financial data. Do you want to teach me about data warehousing? And they're like, absolutely, come on board. And so I went kind of hands-on keyboard, like back into the weeds. And to be quite honest with you, Chris, it kind of, for a short term, and when I say short term, maybe like a couple of years, it kind of kept me from moving up the ranks and levels, but it set me on a career trajectory that I've ended up like in a place, not just career level wise, but passion and challenge and always something new that I'm very confident that I wouldn't have got if I'd stayed where I was.
Yeah, it's interesting because, in talking with other leaders in companies, similar to Deloitte in terms of size, right? Maybe not the specific vertical in terms of consultancy, but the thing that I'm always struck by is there's oftentimes a lot of fear or worry that, the technology will be too difficult for them to grasp, or, they're not going to become an expert in it, or they're not immediately an expert in it. But the flip side to that is understanding the organization, in my opinion, just having talked to so many leaders, is oftentimes so much more powerful than really understanding the inner workings of the technology. Like you'll want to learn those things, but there's almost no substitute for understanding how the organization operates. Who are the key people? What are the key systems that you need to be familiar with? And just how does the business run? And so shed some light there on, like, you brought that knowledge of just basically like kind of the inner workings of the business, and you brought that to a job where maybe the technology you were less familiar with, but how much did that help you to have that insight?
It's been huge. And I don't know what it is about the data and analytics space, but if you look and you start to, again, you watch your series, right? And you start to see just how many varied backgrounds are and how many paths there were into data and analytics. And I think that's the truth. And the reality is also, it is such a broad field, right? Nobody can be an expert in all of it. And you have to even kind of rely down. You'll even have specialties. I remember when I first joined the data warehouse team, you were either part of the back end team or the front end team, right?
Yeah.
I was part of the back end team. I was the data guys. I get much more passionate about that. Now, I didn't get the cool, sexy kind of, reporting, which these days it's be the folks, playing in AI and ML, but I was fascinated by the data problems and kind of being able to just solve problems, understand kind of data relationships and stuff like that. So part of what I think we see so many kind of varied backgrounds is it's such a broad field, and that you can kind of have strengths in so many areas that you could kind of pick your niche even of where you're like deep in expertise. And then you have just a really good, solid understanding of the breadth. And then if you know how to work with people and manage people and do change management, which is the other huge part of our job, right? You'll be successful.
Great. Well, so you talked about change management, and that sort of helps us transition into the next topic of discussion here today. Is you went about building a successful data enterprise inside of Deloitte, and a couple of things like, what did you use as your North Star to kind of define success? Like, how did you know you were done, quote unquote, or on the pathway to being done? Like, what were those metrics, and what types of things did you look to signal that you were on the right path? And then, what were some of the key challenges along the way?
Okay, well, we're not done. I don't know if I've met everybody that's done, but I get what you're saying. Here's the thing. It's changed over the years. Let me kind of help you understand a little bit, because I think I could shed some light for some folks as well. 15 years ago or so, when I joined that data warehouse team, we had a data warehouse with very traditional business intelligence reports, but we had this mindset of Mr. or Mrs. Business customer in the firm, just tell us what you need, and we'll go build you a dashboard, and you come back, in 3 months or 6 months, and you'll be good. We'll have your reports. We had a platform. It was a 2-letter acronym. I won't give it out because it's not the vendor that was the challenge. It was our kind of mindset. But this 2-letter acronym wasn't really, people referred to kind of our services and our platform more with 4-letter words most frequently. It was not a good situation. We had about, a couple of years after I'd been on the team, we had kind of a visionary leader come in and said, this has got to change. And we said, we looked at kind of what was most wrong, kind of not just with our delivery process, but with even capabilities. We modernized our data warehouse. We put in an in-memory platform with real-time replication from all our data sources. People didn't have to wait overnight for reports. And we went and implemented the world's largest self-service BI platform with Tableau at the time. It's still pretty big. I don't know if we're still the biggest, but at the time, I ran the largest Tableau server implementation of any company in the world. And that, Chris, kind of changed thinking. The challenge there was just kind of getting customers to try it. And the way we did that is we found kind of willing business people and got them on board and let them just kind of be the evangelists of, hey, this team and these capabilities have really changed. Now, in that case, we took an approach of, if we build it, they will come.
Yeah.
I don't do that much anymore. If stuff's like so bad and you think you've just got like a no-brainer, maybe you could do that. Like our IT leader basically funded it all. We didn't go try to align business partners and put together value stories and stuff like that. We just did it, and luckily it got all the adoption, and it's been wildly successful and is all still in place. But that was a driver. But we've had kind of very different things. 5 years ago, we really didn't have a great answer. We had great business and self-serve BI. We didn't have a great answer for our data scientists. And it's not 100,000 people there. It's a couple hundred data scientists in the firm that really needed capabilities. But so what we did there is, it was still a fairly sizable investment to go enable all these data scientists with a common platform, which, by the way, is where we use Databricks on what we call our data science lab. In that particular case, to get the funding, we went to all of these groups and that were federated across the firm, and we started to put together the business case, and we started shopping it around to business leaders who would start to put in money. We kind of built this consortium of folks that would contribute. But really, the key thing was we finally, just by happenstance, knew somebody that happened to work for the chief transformation officer at the time, mentioned it to the chief transformation officer. They said, I got 5 minutes, tell me what your idea is. That 5-minute conversation with one of my business data scientists led to us going down the path and getting seed investment. So that was a case of, challenge there was getting the funding, and the way we did that was kind of partnering with the business to tell the business story, and we just went around trying to sell it.
Yeah. And prior to adopting sort of that centralized approach, did you just see, a wide range of local solutions with
Yes.
different tech stacks, and how
Yes.
challenging was it for you to, work with those teams to transition them from what they might have, known and loved, frankly, right, to something that was more central and could benefit from some economies of scale, perhaps?
Yeah, it was a little challenge, especially with some of our more advanced groups, because we had different different maturity levels of teams with data scientists.
Yeah.
So I think back to who is my largest user of the data science lab, my finance strategic analytics team, and they already had their kind of server stood up. They had a well-defined team. Here's the interesting thing. Remember that new data warehouse I said, and the self-serve BI? Well, we had also made some kind of promises about how they would change their world too, and it didn't really pan out. Okay. So they weren't quite bought into, hey, here's the IT guys showing us how they're going to change the world. Yeah. So they were really kind of a show me. So we did get them along, but here's the reality. They weren't the ones, they weren't like banging at it saying, yeah, we're in this. So it was actually other teams that were even kind of not even as mature. And so it was really those teams that hadn't matured yet, who we kind of built the primary coalition around, but we kept the finance strategic analytics team along for the ride. And once we got the platform stood up, and they saw how kind of the key part of the platform is how quickly they can request and get access to data to study. And then the fact that they had cloud-based, like latest and greatest capabilities, they were like an easy sell. They're like,
yeah, that seems to be an important ingredient in these transformation success stories, which is you oftentimes hear like maybe more mature parts of the organization around data science, for example, and they've had to, some organizations refer to it as shadow IT, where they've got to basically build up their own environments and they're separate from the enterprise IT group. And then there's a little bit of a tug of war over that. What seems to be the big, sort of key advantage for the enterprise group is if they can really focus on making the data sets discoverable and consumable, and make, really lower the barrier to entry for people to get access to the data. The tooling starts to fall away a little bit. It's like, hey, you've made it so much easier for me to do my job. And, maybe there's a feature of the tooling that they missed from their own tech stack, but over time, I think that dissipates and they focus more on the efficiency of being able to leverage the data sets.
Yeah, and that's exactly where we are. When I started my story saying, hey, 15 years ago, then 12 years ago, then 5 years ago. It's actually kind of a great segue. It was like, well, what happened in the last few years? Two big transformations that were kind of big things we got on. The biggest, to be quite honest with you, is we aligned across all of, at least in the US, right? Every Deloitte's country is a member firm, but I'll talk US. Each of our businesses, advisory, consulting, audit, and tax, we aligned on a holistic US firm-wide data strategy with those 4 businesses, IT, and our other kind of shared services. And that has been huge. And when I say we aligned, we decided kind of what was important in terms of our strategy. We formalized the chief data officer role, so put leaders in place that had accountability for driving alignment and adoption to that strategy. And it created kind of this, what we call enterprise coordination, that's now happening like light years more than it did previously. And so that's huge. And how that came about, like what drove that? For years, I tried to drive kind of conversations like that from IT, like, hey, we need data discovery and capability and cataloging. And it kind of just got nowhere. This all came about from the top down. I mean, like chief executive officer and those leaders basically asking, hey, what's our data strategy? And saying, well, go talk to audit, talk to consulting, tax, and oh, by the way, go talk to John in IT, right? And they're like, is that best practice? And the answer is no, right? And so that was the first kind of top down that I think the general awareness of AI and ML capabilities, and everybody's saying they need to be technology companies. And it's a real easy to understand, even for executives, that you can't do any of this cool stuff, the sexy front end stuff I talked about, without any of the back end. Or you can, but you're maybe just a day away or an hour away from ending up in the Wall Street Journal for doing something you shouldn't have, because you didn't really even have your data house in order.
One of the things that's fascinating when we talked, previously before today's episode, was one of the use cases where you're looking at, and it ties into climate change, but it also ties into this compliance issue, which is, you're running the data platform for Deloitte, and you're helping data science teams analyze different data sets to include customer data sets, I'm sure. But some of the data that you're evaluating is your own travel data and your own personnel data. And so the protection of that information, of course, is paramount. But can you talk a little bit about how you're using the travel information associated with the work that the professionals at Deloitte are doing to service customers as part of the engagement model, and how that pertains to climate change?
With world climate, there's just a whole new lens, right, on kind of looking at what we can do as an organization and as a world, and even as individuals, to impact climate change in a positive way. In fact, Deloitte has recently adopted a strategy called the World Climate Strategy. If you were to Google Deloitte and World Climate, you get a link to a site that talks about kind of our point of view. Deloitte has committed to achieving kind of net zero greenhouse emissions by 2030. And now that's 20 years even faster than the Paris Agreement says they'd like, right, to see that. So that's a huge deal. But we just talked about this, right? What does that mean? How do we as an organization, right, for just our organization, get to that point? So, our data scientists are actually using the data science lab platform I mentioned that uses Databricks to actually try to model out kind of how we actually get there. It is a complex kind of model to try to think about. It's not only just kind of what is our revenue growth going to look like, and what's that going to mean in terms of headcount, but even we have this whole dynamic about hybrid work environments, and what does that kind of look like. So they're using the platform to try to answer kind of those more predictive, prescriptive type questions, so that our executives can figure out how we're actually going to reduce our travel to get us to that net zero greenhouse gas by 2030. Because that, to be quite honest with you, is probably one of the biggest chunks that we have to deal with. And the good thing is, I like this is another good thing about just working for Deloitte in general, is we set really lofty goals. We believe in strategy. We know how to execute to get there, and even to show that, we're standing up a dashboard, the World Climate Dashboard, that's actually going to be transparent for all our folks to actually show not what that commitment is, but how we're progressing and how we're going to get there.
And this is excellent. And in theory, the model development that you're doing to take sort of an inward look at how Deloitte operates and what is the carbon footprint on a per professional employee basis, right? To include the travel, but also the facilities costs, and you get into that hybrid model, and some people are going to be splitting their time between home and an office space.
Yeah.
And what's the carbon footprint associated with an office? In theory, you could take the learnings from that model development and start applying it to some of your customers, some of the clients that you work with, to help them on their carbon footprint approach.
Yeah. That's a common theme, Chris. We even kind of have a name where it's called like Deloitte on Deloitte. And it happens all over the place. It happens just like you mentioned and articulated probably even better than I could how it would play out. But even in the technology space, right? Like I'm responsible for making technology decisions that are best for Deloitte to kind of run its business internally. And that's what drives kind of our decisions. But we obviously also have lots of alliances and partnerships when we go to market. There's many cases where it's really advantageous for us to take our learnings internally with technology, even just for example, with Databricks, and I've been a customer for several years now. And as our consultants are going out into the market and talking to customers about their challenges and their problems, our consultants leverage Deloitte on Deloitte kind of learnings all the time.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's shift to, sort of wrapping up today's discussion. Really appreciate your time. One of the things that we like to ask leaders, such as yourself, is what advice they would give someone that's aspiring to have a career in data and AI. And I think also, again, tying back to your tenure at Deloitte, because it's, 20 years of you kind of navigating and, maybe foregoing a step up in a career ladder, sort of position to really pursue what you're passionate about. What advice, looking back, you're now the CDO, so you've made it pretty far, which is fantastic. But what advice would you give to someone that's starting out in their career and looks to you as a role model for what they'd like to accomplish?
I get asked this question a lot. For example, there's a group here in Nashville called the Nashville Software School that has kind of students that are in data science programs and data analyst programs. And these are people kind of making career changes. So I get asked this question a lot. And here, Chris, here's kind of my kind of top three kind of as of now. The first one, and it's the obvious one for these folks, is get data literate. So that's just a broad kind of advice if you're going to be working in the space or you want to work in this space. And I was talking with Dr. Paul Barth from Click just last week about data literacy. He's now the head of data literacy at Click. And I liked something I saw in the presentation that we were looking at. What does that mean? It means you can read, right? You can read and work with data. You can analyze data, but I love the last part. You can argue with data. So you're data literate when you're actually not just working with it and understanding it and using it, but you're arguing with it. So get data literate is one. Another one that's kind of more recent is don't think you have to be a coder, right? Don't think you have to be a coder these days. I like to say you could be a clicker, okay? You don't have to learn to write Python, right? The tools have advanced that you can develop models without having a degree in statistics. So don't be afraid. Last week, we did a webinar internally in the firm focused on our data science lab. It was called Auto ML and the Rise of the Citizen Data Scientist. We had 1,500 people from 45 countries attend that session. And we were just bombarded with people afterwards. And I remember a tax senior manager said, I've been very interested in analytics and I've kind of played around. He said, you guys kind of really showed me that I can go do this. I think the transformation that we saw years ago with business intelligence, like with kind of Tableau, my personal point of view, I know we still need expert data scientists, but I think we're evolving. So don't be afraid if you're not a coder. And finally, last one, it's probably the most important, learn to tell stories. Learn to tell stories. Just Google data and storytelling and you'll find tons of things, but I can't estimate how powerful that is if you're going to have kind of a career in this space and be successful.
Thank you for joining this episode of Champions of Data and AI, brought to you by Databricks. Thousands of data leaders rely on Databricks to simplify data and AI so data teams can innovate faster and solve the world's toughest problems. Visit Databricks.com to learn how data leaders are unlocking the true potential of all their data.